Snow had been falling over Maple Hollow since late afternoon, soft, steady flakes drifting down in slow spirals, each one turning gently in the lantern light before settling across rooftops, fences, and the winding cobblestone paths. By early evening, the whole town was wrapped in a thick, quiet blanket of white, the kind of snow that softens every sound, slows every movement, and makes the world feel calm, unhurried, and wonderfully still. Inside his cottage, Daniel stood near the window, watching the flakes drift lazily past the glass. The warm glow of the fireplace flickered behind him, casting soft, amber light across the room. The scent of burning cedar drifted through the air, warm and comforting. Pip, curled on his favorite blanket, lifted his head and gave a small, questioning chirp. Daniel smiled. "You want to go out for a bit, buddy?" Pip blinked slowly, then stretched, long and luxurious, before hopping down from the blanket. His paws made soft thumps against the wooden floor as he padded toward the door, tail flicking with quiet anticipation. Daniel pulled on his coat, wrapping it snugly around his shoulders. The fabric was warm from hanging near the fire, and he tucked his scarf into place before opening the door. A wave of cold air drifted in, crisp, clean, and filled with the scent of fresh snow. Pip stepped out first, his small orange paws pressing tiny prints into the untouched white. He paused, lifted one paw, and shook it dramatically, as if personally offended by the temperature. Then, with a determined flick of his tail, he ventured forward. Daniel chuckled softly and followed him outside. The lanterns along the street glowed warmly, their golden halos shimmering through the falling snow. The flakes drifted lazily through the beams, catching the light before settling onto the quiet cobblestones. The whole town looked like a painting, soft edges, muted colors, and a peaceful hush that wrapped around everything. Daniel walked slowly, letting the calm of the evening settle into his bones. His boots made gentle, crunching sounds with each step, muffled by the thick layer of snow. Pip trotted beside him, occasionally stopping to sniff a snow-covered bush or tap at a drifting flake with a curious paw. The bakery sat at the corner, its windows fogged from the warmth inside. A faint golden glow spilled across the snow, and Daniel paused for a moment, watching the light shimmer. The scent of fresh bread lingered faintly in the air, carried by the stillness of the night. Pip hopped onto the low step outside the bakery, shook one paw dramatically again, then sat down with a small huff, as if the cold was a personal inconvenience. Daniel smiled. "You wanted to come, remember?" Pip blinked slowly, unimpressed. They continued on, moving toward the creek. The snow fell thicker here, drifting in soft waves across the path. The wooden bridge came into view, its railing covered in a smooth, untouched line of snow. The creek beneath it still flowed, a thin layer of ice forming along the edges. The water murmured softly as it wound through town, the sound gentle and rhythmic. Daniel brushed a bit of snow from the railing and rested his hands on the cool wood. The lanterns along the path cast warm reflections on the icy surface below, shimmering faintly with each ripple of the water. Pip hopped up beside him, placing his front paws on the railing. His breath formed tiny clouds in the air as he watched the water drift beneath the ice. His tail curled around his body, the tip flicking gently. The night was quiet. No wind, no distant chatter. Just the soft whisper of falling snow and the steady murmur of the creek. Daniel took a slow breath, letting the cold air fill his lungs. "Peaceful out here," he said softly. Pip leaned against his arm, offering a slow blink, the cat version of agreement. They stayed there for a long moment, watching the snow drift across the water. The lanterns glowed warmly, their reflections dancing on the icy surface. The world felt still, wrapped in a gentle hush that only winter could bring. A soft breeze stirred the snow on the branches above them, sending a small flurry drifting down. Pip lifted his head, watching the flakes fall with slow, deliberate curiosity. One landed on his nose, and he blinked in surprise before shaking it off. Daniel laughed quietly. "You're something else." Pip pretended not to hear. After a while, Daniel straightened and brushed a bit of snow from his coat. "Let's walk a little more." Pip hopped down from the railing, landing softly in the snow. He shook his paws again, dramatically, as always, then trotted ahead, leaving a fresh trail of tiny prints. They followed the path that curved gently along the creek. The snow deepened here, soft and powdery, muffling their steps even more. The trees lining the water were heavy with white, their branches bending slightly under the weight. Every so often, a clump of snow slid off a branch and landed with a soft thump. As they approached the small footpath leading toward the town square, Daniel noticed something unusual. A single lantern glowed in the window of the bookstore. The shop was always closed by this hour, especially on snowy nights, but there it was. A warm, steady light shining through the frosted glass, casting a soft glow onto the snow-covered street. Daniel paused, tilting his head slightly. Pip stopped too, following Daniel's gaze. His ears perked, and he gave a quiet, inquisitive chirp. "Someone must be doing inventory," Daniel murmured, though he knew the owner rarely stayed late. Still, the light wasn't unsettling, just curious. A small, gentle mystery tucked into the quiet of the evening, the kind of thing Maple Hollow was known for. Little moments that made the town feel alive, even in the stillness of winter. They continued on, passing the square. The fountain in the center was frozen, its stone edges dusted with snow. The benches around it were empty, each one holding a smooth layer of white. The town clock tower rose above them, its face glowing softly. Daniel glanced up and noticed a faint flicker of light behind one of the upper windows. Probably just the old heating system, he thought. The building was ancient, after all. Still, it added another layer of quiet curiosity to the night. They moved on, following the path that curved around the square. Snow had gathered thickly on the rooftops, softening the sharp edges of chimneys and eaves. The lampposts cast warm halos across the cobblestones, each one glowing like a small sun in the winter dusk. The falling snow drifted lazily through the light, turning the air into a gentle swirl of white. Pip hopped onto a bench near the fountain, leaving tiny paw prints behind him. He sniffed the air, then settled briefly, his tail curling around his body. He looked like a small, orange puff of warmth against the white backdrop. Daniel sat beside him for a moment, letting the quiet of the square settle around them. The snow muffled everything: footsteps, distant sounds, even the faint hum of the town's evening routines. It was as though Maple Hollow had taken a deep breath and exhaled into stillness. After a few minutes, Pip stood, shook off the snow that had gathered on his fur, and hopped down. Daniel followed, brushing snow from his coat as they continued toward the greenhouse. The greenhouse sat at the edge of the square, its glass panes glowing softly from within. Even in winter, it held warmth, enough to keep the herbs and winter plants alive. Frost clung to the outside of the glass, forming delicate patterns that looked like feathers and ferns. The warm light inside made the frost shimmer. As they approached, Daniel heard a soft clink, a gentle, rhythmic sound, like someone adjusting pots or watering cans. It wasn't unusual. Mrs. Alder often tended her plants late into the evening, but the sound felt comforting, a reminder that even on the quietest nights, Maple Hollow had its own heartbeat. Pip pressed his nose to the glass, fogging it slightly. He peered inside, eyes wide with curiosity. The silhouettes of plants swayed gently, their leaves casting soft shadows across the frosted panes. Daniel smiled. "She's probably checking on the winter mint." Pip blinked slowly, as if agreeing. They moved on, following the path that curved behind the greenhouse and led toward a row of cottages. Each one glowed warmly from within, their windows fogged from the heat of fireplaces and evening meals. Smoke drifted lazily from chimneys, rising into the snowy air before fading into the night. Daniel paused near one cottage, where a lantern hung from a small hook beside the door. The lantern's flame flickered gently, casting a warm glow across the snow. A wreath of winter greenery hung on the door, dusted with fresh snow. The sight made Daniel's chest warm. Pip trotted ahead, leaving a neat trail of paw prints. He paused near a small garden gate, sniffing at the snow-covered ground. The garden beyond was quiet, its plants sleeping beneath the winter blanket. Daniel joined him, resting a hand on the gate. "Spring will wake it all up again," he said softly. Pip gave a tiny chirp, as if acknowledging the promise. They continued along the path, passing more cottages. Some had candles glowing in the windows. Others had soft lamplight spilling across the snow. The town felt alive in a quiet, gentle way, each home a small pocket of warmth against the cold. As they approached the edge of the residential lane, Daniel noticed a set of footprints in the snow. Not strange in itself. People walked through Maple Hollow all the time, but these prints were spaced far apart, as though someone had been walking with long, deliberate strides. They led from the direction of the old library and curved toward the creek path. Daniel tilted his head slightly. Pip sniffed the prints, whiskers twitching. He looked up at Daniel with a soft, questioning sound. "Probably someone heading home," Daniel said, though the prints looked fresh, very fresh. Snow was still falling, yet the edges of the prints were crisp. Still, there was nothing unsettling about them. Just another small curiosity tucked into the snowy evening. They followed the prints for a short distance before they veered off toward another cottage. Daniel and Pip continued straight, heading toward the library. The library stood tall and quiet, its stone walls dusted with snow. A single lantern glowed in the window near the entrance, casting a warm golden light across the steps. The library was usually closed by this hour, but sometimes the librarians stayed late to sort books or prepare displays. Daniel paused at the bottom of the steps, looking up at the glowing window. The light flickered softly, steady and warm. Pip sat beside him, tail wrapped neatly around his paws. He looked up at the window too, blinking slowly. "Someone's working late," Daniel murmured. The thought was comforting. Maple Hollow had always been a town where people took their time, where routines were gentle and unhurried. A late-night librarian fit perfectly into that rhythm. They continued past the library, following the path that curved back toward the creek. Snow continued to fall, drifting in soft waves. The lanterns glowed warmly, casting gentle halos across the path. The town rested in peaceful stillness, each cottage tucked beneath a blanket of white. As they neared the creek again, Daniel noticed the faint sound of wind chimes. Soft, delicate notes drifted through the air, carried by the gentle breeze. The chimes hung from the porch of a nearby cottage, their metal pieces lightly tapping against one another. Pip's ears perked, and he looked toward the sound. His tail flicked once, slowly. Daniel smiled. "Pretty, isn't it?" The chimes continued their soft song, blending with the whisper of falling snow and the distant murmur of the creek. They walked a little farther, moving toward the guest house. The soft glow of a fire shone through the window, and Daniel could see the faint silhouette of someone settling into a chair. The scene was warm and inviting, a perfect contrast to the snowy night outside. Pip paused near a snow-covered bench, sniffing the air before continuing on. His tail flicked with quiet purpose, guiding the way home. The path ahead curved gently toward Daniel's cottage. Snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in soft white. The lanterns glowed warmly, their light shimmering through the drifting flakes. Daniel took a slow breath, letting the cold air fill his lungs. The night felt peaceful, calm, and full of quiet wonder. Pip trotted ahead, leaving a trail of tiny prints that led straight toward home. When they reached the cottage, Daniel opened the door, and warm air spilled out to greet them. Pip darted inside immediately, heading straight for the fireplace. Daniel closed the door behind them, brushing snow from his shoulders. The fire crackled softly, casting warm light across the room. Pip curled up on his favorite blanket, paws tucked beneath him, eyes already drifting closed. Daniel knelt beside him, running a gentle hand along his back. Pip purred softly, the sound low and steady. "Good walk," Daniel whispered. He stood and moved to the window, watching the snow continue to fall. The world outside was soft and white, the lanterns glowing faintly through the drifting flakes. He could still see the faint reflection of the bookstore's lantern in the distance, a tiny golden dot in the snowy night. Daniel made a cup of tea, chamomile, warm and fragrant, and settled into his chair near the fire. Pip shifted slightly, stretching one paw toward the warmth. Daniel sipped his tea slowly, letting the heat spread through him. The cottage was quiet, save for the crackling fire and Pip's soft purring. The snow outside fell in gentle waves, each flake drifting down with unhurried grace. He thought about the evening, the quiet walk, the glowing lanterns, the soft mysteries tucked into the snowy night. Nothing urgent, nothing troubling. Just small, gentle curiosities that made Maple Hollow feel alive. The bookstore light, the faint flicker in the clock tower, the soft clink from the greenhouse, the footprints in the snow, the lantern by the garden gate, little signs that the town breathed even in its stillest moments. Daniel finished his tea and set the cup aside. He leaned back in his chair, letting his eyes drift half-closed. The fire warmed the room, casting soft shadows that danced gently across the walls. Pip shifted again, curling tighter into his blanket. His purring slowed, becoming a soft, steady hum. Daniel watched him for a moment, smiling. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing Maple Hollow in quiet, peaceful stillness. The lanterns glowed softly. The creek murmured beneath its thin layer of ice. The town rested, warm and calm beneath the winter night. Daniel closed his eyes fully now, letting the warmth of the fire and the softness of the evening settle around him. The cottage felt safe, cozy, and perfectly still. Pip's purring faded into the gentle crackle of the fire, and Maple Hollow slept.